is because the American church has watered down the gospel. We've completely watered it down. And you say, well, what do you mean? What I'm saying is that the Church of America today isn't talking about a relationship with Jesus. It's not talking about an opportunity for you to serve the living Christ. It is simply talking about you joining a religion. Can I tell you that religion sends more people to hell than anything? There are more religious, but I would be willing to say that if the statistics were known, which they're not, but I would be willing to say there are probably just as many religious people in hell today as there are atheists. You say, well, Pastor, that's pretty bold. I didn't say that. Jesus said that. Matthew 7, right? Not everybody that says, Lord, Lord, is going to enter in. But in our society today, we don't want to look at that. We don't want to talk about the fact that Jesus says, not everyone that says, Lord, Lord, will enter in. We want to show up and be like, oh, okay, I've checked off my box. I'm here today, and I've came and I've murmured some song to some distant being that I've never connected with. But why is it? Why is it that we as a church, or we as Christians, or we as a denomination, or we as a religion, if you will, why do we come and continue to go through these traditions and go through these steps to some distant being that we can't connect with? What's the purpose? Why? Why is it that we stand and we sing songs that half the time we don't even believe? Oh, that's kind of bold, right? I mean, we just sang that one of my favorite songs, Different, right? I want to be different. And we sing this song and say, I want to be different. I want to be changed. And then we leave and we don't change and we're not different and we do nothing different. Or we sing a song about the old cross. The cross that's the emblem of suffering and shame. The cross that Christ took our sin and made it his. And he took our sin debt and he took our wrath. And we sing that song and nothing changes in our heart. Nothing changes when we talk about the cross. Nothing changes when we talk about the blood. Nothing changes when we talk about Christ. Yet we just check off a box and we say, okay, this distant God has seen me check off my box today. And yet we water down the gospel. And you say, well, what example did you get from that this week, okay? I'm glad you asked. I won't mention the church's name, but it's a mega church. Had an interview with their digital media director this week. And they basically were talking about Easter, okay? Which if you ever talk to me for more than, 5 minutes, which if you've talked to me for more than 5 minutes. I think I'll get an amen over here, but you'll know that I'm not a fan of Easter, okay? And if you talk to most of our leadership around here, they'll kind of tell you the same thing. We're not a fan of Easter. Why? Because it has nothing to do with the Bible. Absolutely nothing. What we call Easter is completely wrong, right? And you're like, is it? It is. Where does the term Easter come from? The goddess Ishtar. It's a pagan holiday that the Catholic Church said, hey, we're going to start doing this. Why bunnies? Right? I was able to answer this question actually this week. Why bunnies? Why Easter eggs, right? Why bunnies? Anybody know that? I'm glad you asked. Because the goddess Ishtar is the goddess of fertility. And one of the most fertile animals on the planet is a rabbit. And so we celebrate as a church this entire aspect of a pagan god or goddess. And we mix in the rabbits and the stuff. And we call it a church tradition. And in this interview of this over thousands of people in this church, that has traveling worship and all these other things that is spilling out this false gospel, they asked this particular digital media director, they said, how do you prepare for Easter? And her exact words were this. She said, we want to try to reach the people that we call unchurched. So what we do is we make sure not to use any of those church type words like resurrection or like blood. We don't want to talk about these things because we don't want the unchurched people to feel uncomfortable. Whew. So I share this video, and I have a guy this morning. I wake up to a guy this morning that says, I know this person personally. I know multiple people in that church personally, and you should not make accusations like this, because my exact words were, if you take the blood and the resurrection out of the gospel, there is no gospel. And he says, you should listen to the whole interview before making such accusations. I'm like, bro, the video's right there. I heard the words out of her mouth that we do not want to promote blood or resurrection. So what are we promoting? We're promoting everybody come and have a good time. We're promoting this watered down gospel that your life doesn't have to change, that God understands. What was it, Super Bowl? He gets me, right? That's the kind of gospel that we have in America. And we wonder why the church has no power today. Because we're so separated from God, as it tells us right here, verse number 2, but your iniquities have separated between you and your God. We have separated from God because we've watered down the gospel to a point to where we get to live our lives however we want. We get to do whatever we choose. And this distant God off past Pluto somewhere is going to tell us, enter in, my good and faithful servant. What sense does that make? What sense does that make? But what does Paul say about the gospel? Let's go to Romans 1 for a second. Let's go to Romans 1 for a second, verse 16. And let's see what Paul has to say about the gospel. I hear some people still turning. Romans 1 and 16, it's on the screen if you don't have it, says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. Now let me understand something for you. We had this conversation actually last night, Tab and I and a couple of friends. That word believe is not what you think. We completely misinterpret that word believe. I can tell you that that wall is gray, and you believe it, right? Why? Because you see it's gray. I can tell you that wall used to be black, and you'd be like, really, a black wall in a church? Yeah, it was black. We painted it because it didn't make any sense to have a black wall. But you can believe that, right? If I tell you that, I've been a football coach and I've been a defensive coordinator, I've been an offensive coordinator, and we've won a lot of games. You might believe that, right? Because some of you may know that I've coached for several years. Some of you may say that, hey, I may be like, hey, I've been a baseball coach and I've won some conference championships and that kind of thing. And you'd be like, oh, well, okay, I can believe that. But here's the thing. When we look at this word believe, it isn't simply that I believe that there is some distant God out here past Pluto. This is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that is persuaded. To everyone that believes wholeheartedly, that trusts in Jesus. Now let me ask you something. Are you going to trust somebody that you don't know? Are you going to trust somebody that's some far off, distant God that can't be touched out past Pluto somewhere? You see, that's the problem with the church today. And I'm not talking about Abounding Grace, so easy. But maybe I am. That's between you and God. But that's the problem with the American church today. That is the problem why we don't see things like we used to see them years ago. Because we've watered down the gospel to a point to where we feel like God serves us rather than us serving God. And we've watered down the gospel to a point to where all I have to do is believe that this distant God lives somewhere out past Pluto and that he's going to allow me to go to heaven one day. But there is no trust in that. If you enjoyed that message, then you'll want to check out this video for more biblical truths. You can help spread the gospel by clicking the like button or even consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.